The only thing to fear are those Batmobile missions.
Hey everyone, just letting you know that all figures found in this review could be found over at bigbadtoystore.com. Links could be found in the description below, and if you guys use them, they help out the channel quite a bit. One of the most recent figure announcements that McFarlane made that got me pretty excited is to see that more love is being given over to the Arkham Knight character roster. And one of those figures is going to be made for, as you see right here, the Arkham Knight incarnation of Scarecrow. Now, there's a lot of things to say about how they changed up the design aesthetic of Scarecrow this time around versus the way that he looked like in Arkham Asylum. Completely different, but at the same time, it's supposed to match the change in tone, the maturity of the game, and how much darker and more sinister not just Scarecrow himself has become as far as the villain is concerned, but also just how the game pretty much went for this darker, more broodier climactic finish to the Arkham franchise, at least specifically from Rocksteady. So in order to kind of give off that vibe, they also overhauled the design of Scarecrow, and McFarlane seems to be aiming to giving you the quintessential figure version of that Scarecrow. And here he is in 7-inch fashion, and here's the thing, I don't know necessarily which one do I prefer, whether I want the much slightly more cartoony and fantastical version of Scarecrow from Arkham Asylum or this version. Nevertheless, they do keep up with appearances as far as continuity is concerned and how they kind of call back to certain things from that game. And it looks like they're doing a similar approach here from the McFarlane version. One thing I'll let you know off the bat right now though, is that this is most definitely a customizer's dream of a figure. This is definitely a figure that fits that same kind of tier or echelon of people that like to do custom jobs for their figures, because one thing that I would love to either do myself or have somebody else do, somebody who does do customization options, would be to give this guy more of a browner color palette, because as you can see, he's black all around except for the traditional orange accents that he's got going on right here with the tubing, the plastic containers, and the stuff going alongside the needles of his glove. Things like that, okay, I get, but you'll notice that he's kind of more veered towards a slightly grayer and blacker hue with his overall color scheme. And I know for a fact that in the game, he's much browner. He's got brown aesthetics as far as the burlap sack around his head and the noose around his neck, as well as the overcoat that he's got going alongside here in the back. So that's one thing that I will admit I have the strong instinct to want to nitpick, but frankly I feel like my nitpicks kind of end there, because what he lacks in the accurate color scheme, he makes up more than enough in detail. This is quite honestly one of the most detailed McFarlane figures that I think they've produced up until this point, and they managed to fall on the property of Arkham Knight out of all things, because there's just so much history being told inside of this design of Scarecrow personally, that at this point McFarlane couldn't help but want to honor that history and make sure that it comes across well in this figure. And you see that happening an awful lot, especially with the, like I mentioned before, around the chest and abdominal area. You see all these tubes connected to different parts of his body. You see the vials right here with his fear toxin inside, but then it starts to kind of wrap around towards the back, where he's even got a separate tank. It looks to be like his own personal stash of fear toxin kind of holed up here in the back, with a little bit of detail going alongside the patches of his coat, as well as the tubes kind of seeping and kind of pouring itself into that coat. And then we get down to the arms. The left one is kind of just very standard and basic. You have an awful lot of the stitching going alongside of the costume, not only on that arm, but also on the hood over his head. You could see how they kind of etched out each individual stitching, and I like that they took the time to be able to do that. But the parts that make me really giddy with this overall costume is going to be, of course, the head. The head sculpt right there looks amazing. I can understand maybe, just maybe, some people making some comparisons to being more of a sinister and evil looking Taskmaster, because that is one of the things that kind of came to mind, because he's looking just a little bit more skeletal in this version as as opposed to how he actually looked like in the game. In the game, I personally feel like he looked a bit more zombie-like. Here, it looks like just a skeleton with some things kind of going alongside his mouth, and then of course the breathing containers on the sides of his jaw. But if you look a little closer, you can actually make out the teeth even painted from underneath the stitching going alongside the mouth. So I like that little detail, as well as the color in eyes, which may be a little inaccurate, but with what they had to work with as far as the scale is concerned, they kind of had to do that in order to make the eyes stand out. As we work our way down, one of my other favorite parts of the costume as far as design is concerned is in fact the gloved out right arm right here with the needles containing his fear toxin. Not only because of the way that it's all detailed and painted, but also the way of how this wire or this kind of containing tube that connects to the rest of the containers on his back are connected via the bicep strap. And furthermore, and we'll get to more of this in the articulation portion, it doesn't interrupt anything. It actually fits a purpose and a function, so I like that they were able to kind of synthesize both right there and then. As we go further down, you'll notice that an awful lot of the traditional kind of textures that McFarlane is known for doing really well are still on tap right here, especially with the overcoat that's kind of slightly blowing, but at least it's not as bad as some capes that have garnered certain Batman with that kind of winded up design that I'm not a huge fan of. But here they strike a good balance of having it be somewhat stationary while at the same time kind of blowing and giving him a much more menacing looking presence. Then we get to my third and last detail that I gush over and I really love, though it comes at a price, and that is that if you guys keep up with a little bit of the lore of the Arkham games, you'll notice that Scarecrow didn't exactly have a fitting end at the end of Arkham Asylum. Spoilers, he actually gets taken underneath the water by Killer Croc, leading many to presume that he got eaten, only for some text, in-game text and background information on the lore dictates that Scarecrow did manage to escape Killer Croc's grasp, but at the cost of his leg pretty much getting mauled over. And not only did Rocksteady incorporate that into the design via this leg brace, but McFarlane decided to carry it on over, and you actually have his full-on leg brace kind of encompassing the entirety of his left leg right here. You don't see any of that going on here on the right leg. You just see an awful lot of, like I said, the traditional kind of leathery texting along with some pipes and little tubes kind of coalescing alongside the thigh and the diaper area. But this leg brace, there's just something about it that I just really like the fine touches given over to it, even though that, like I said, they had to make some compromises with the brace as far as the ankle is concerned. You see a little bit of separation right there where it's just kind of kept there for appearances, but they needed to do that because they were already sacrificing a bit of an articulation to bring some of these details and really great nuances to fruition. You see, the head is able to fully rotate 360 degrees, slightly tilt from side to side, but when it comes to vertical movement, it just kind of nudges. It doesn't really move in any form of direction, whether it be up or down, all that greatly. In fact, he's kind of stuck slightly in a slumped position. I understand that, like I said, Scarecrow's personality kind of gives it off the vibe that he believes he's the smartest doctor in the room, and therefore he kind of looks down on an awful lot of his victims. But at the same time, I kind of wish that some more mobility would be granted towards the top side portion of his neck. He's just kind of stuck right there, and I don't know if maybe that's also another compromise to be able to favor the loose neck noose right here around his neck so that you're able to kind of move it about. I like that little detail for the flexibility, but at the same time, I kind of wish that a little bit more of that traditional McFarlane neck joint was still viable here, found on Scarecrow himself. The arms are then a little bit more on the traditional side. Both are able to rotate vertically 360 degrees as well as extend to the sides, albeit the left one was just a little tough on the rotated side, whereas the right one was a whole lot smoother, which is ironic considering that you have a little bit more going on here on the right shoulder that kind of stops it in its way versus the left one. Plus, when you kind of flatten them down, I noticed the right one flattens all the way across as opposed to the left that kind of sticks out at a bit of an angle. Kind of wish that both were a bit more flush symmetrically. But then we get to the bicep swivels, which is pretty standard on the left arm. But when we get to the right arm with the needle gun or needle glove, so to speak, right here kind of adhered to his forearm and his hand, I love that they were able to blend in the bicep swivel into one of the straps that kind of holds everything together, quote unquote, via the design. I like that they were able to kind of invisibly mark that in there, and it's a pretty much straightforward cut as opposed to the plastic kind of going in this U shape like traditional McFarlane's over on the left arm. So I thought that was a nice little detail. Both arms are able to bend at the elbow via the two joints, and like I mentioned before, that little tube connected to the forearm needle application right here doesn't come in the way. They were able to mold it in a way where it favors the articulation and never gets in the way, and there's no risk of it kind of wearing and tearing, at least not anytime soon. So I dig that. And then we get over to the wrists that are both able to fully rotate, even the one with the needle glove, so to speak, because it is disconnected from the forearm, so no sacrifices made there. They're able to rotate as well as being able to pivot inwards and outwards. Unfortunately, we then get to probably the biggest sacrifice that almost makes me question that whole 22 points of articulation selling point that McFarlane often does with their figures, which is the torso piece. As you can see, much like the glove over here, we have more connection via tubing here on the center portion of his torso leading into his waist. So you can only really nudge the torso left and right slightly, but there's no way to rotate it whatsoever. Of course, that's damn near impossible. But the joint itself is also very sticky. It doesn't really flex all that well. And I understand that some of you are going to say that, this is Scarecrow. He's meant to be sitting and standing and just monologuing throughout the game like he often does. But still kind of wish that there was something a little bit there just to kind of give the figures just some added level value. Plus, I don't know if it's just me. Hopefully it's not an isolated incident. But at the same time, kind of wish that it was. I'm kind of conflicted on this. There's something about the way that his torso is sculpted that I personally don't like all that much. How this cool belly area is just kind of protruding. It's almost like he's kind of pressing his stomach forward. I don't know. Maybe that's just the way that Scarecrow was designed in the Rocksteady 3D print that they sent on over to McFarlane. But there's just something about the way that he kind of just postures himself here neutrally, I just do not personally favor. So, and the lack of mid-torso articulation just is not doing it any favors. So that's probably why it's bugging me so much. Once we get to the legs, it gets a bit more interesting, more so than even the arms, because the top leg joint on the right leg extends forward and back, as well as the one on the left. So it's pretty traditional and standard right there, and both are also able to extend only as far as the code kind of allows it, since it's kind of wrapping itself around here towards the back. So extension is only done about that far for both legs. But once we get to the knees is where things get a little interesting, because the knee on the right leg has two joints that traditionally allows the leg to bend all the way upwards. It also has an ankle joint with the joints that I really, really love baked into the boot on that right foot that's able to not only allow it to fully rotate at the top, but also pivot downwards via that piece that kind of splits into two halves and then move upwards about that far. So that's pretty cool, as well as the toesies on that boot is pretty flexible, as well as the left one. So let's go ahead and get the toesies out of the way since they follow the traditional McFarlane style. It's once we get to the ankle and the knee of the left braced up leg that things get, like I said, interesting. And one can make the argument that we're actually lacking some of those points of articulation from the 22 advertised ones that McFarlane likes to use. But this time around, it does favor the character and the personality in a way that I thought was kind of neat, because as you can see, the brace is only supposed to be able to bend at the knee once. They kept that going here in the McFarlane, where you're able to fully bend the knee at about a 90-degree angle, but no more than that. It does bend where the knee brace or the leg brace overall should be bending according to that design. So I like that they were able to respect that. And then the ankle is built into into a joint that only bends downwards and forwards. It does not rotate whatsoever, but at the same time, it's not supposed to, because of the way that pretty much the brace is bolting his ankle into just one singular kind of position like so. And here's the thing. I've gotten some comments of people saying that, well, Penguin is not supposed to have articulation made like that when I made that Arkham City figure review for Penguin, Ra's al Ghul, and then, of course, that Catwoman. But Penguin is not necessarily handicapped, or he didn't have some kind of limitations as far as the character design is concerned via the lore that was kind of attached to his backstory. He does. So this is one of the instances, I'm sorry if this is triggering, but this is one of the instances where sacrifice and articulation is actually kind of okay with me because of the way that everything is designed here via the personality of the character. The only complaint I will reuse though is the whole accessory one. Once again, because besides the base and the card that's actually utilizing a little bit of the Arkham Knight concept art that I really love, there is nothing else really thrown in with this version of Scarecrow. And it's funny because his hand, at least the one without the needle glove, is kind of positioned or sculpted in a way that looks like it should be holding something. And that's where the light bulb went off on me. Because, as you guys have seen showcased before on this channel, I do happen to own the DC Collectibles version of the Arkham Asylum Scarecrow, as you can kind of see right here with that original somewhat fantastical and cartoony interpretation of Scarecrow from those games because of the way that it's kind of more infused with the style of the animated series and maybe even some of the comics as far as character portrayals are concerned, especially with the way that his mask is kind of veered off towards the Arkham Knight version. As you can see right here via this comparison, they're very night and day. Like, there's really no way to compare the two because they're almost completely different characters, or it's almost like a character that's played by two different actors via the Batman mythology. You know, it's just, there's no way to say, oh, which one is better. It just really falls down to preference. If you really like the much more mature version of Scarecrow via Arkham Knight, or the more fantastical version of Arkham Asylum, or potentially even City should he have shown up there via this Scarecrow. The reason, however, why I wanted to put some attention on over to this version is because this DC Collectibles Scarecrow did come with his own accessory of his fear toxin or fear powder, if you will, inside of this little burlap sack accessory. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, that neck around the rope that's kind of holding everything together via this sack looks thin enough that maybe, just maybe, and as I placed it into Scarecrow's non-needled hand here on the Arkham Knight version, not only did it pop into place, but it fits perfectly. Almost as if maybe, just maybe, that was part of the original design. And as you can see right here, as Scarecrow kind of falls in disbelief, the original Arkham Asylum Scarecrow, it fits right in place to where it's almost like it's back home. So as you can see with this accessory, I was able to dress up the Arkham Knight version a whole lot better and just make him an even better figure than he was before. Still believe that McFarlane Toys could have thrown something in like always, but at the same time, what they were lacking in potential accessories or some sacrificed articulation, and the overall paint decal could have been a bit more accurate. The detail worked into the Arkham Knight McFarlane Toys Scarecrow here is probably some of the best work I've seen McFarlane do in a really long time. And the lack of articulation this time around didn't bother me so much because of just how much more faithful it was to this character, at least for me, versus others that I've covered in most recent times or in the past on this channel. And the quality at play here leads me to believe that this is one of the finer non-Batman McFarlane toy figures I've added to my collection in recent memory as well, and a very fitting one for Halloween, especially this time as we're getting kind of reminiscing and also kind of homesick for a quality Batman game, especially after the release of Gotham Knights. Oh my god.
What is this? Some nerd shit?
So therefore, I'm going to give Arkham Knight McFarlane Toys Scarecrow a proper 8 out of 10. It has won me over despite its shortcomings. And if you guys want to add your own Arkham Knight Scarecrow to your collection, that way you're able to complete the ensemble of pretty much what's probably going to be our last batch of Arkham Knight figures before potentially moving on to Arkham Origins. I can only wish. Then be sure to use the link in the description description that takes you on over to Big Bad Toy Store. You guys can order him now and have him ship immediately and bring him to your collection and help out the channel in the process. Otherwise, guys, I appreciate you for watching the review. If you guys liked it, do hit the thumbs up button. If not, hit the thumbs down. Comment below what you guys think of the Arkham Knight McFarlane Toys figure for Scarecrow. Does he fit the bill? Do you think that this is a faithful interpretation, or do you prefer the original Arkham Asylum portrayal that has a much more cartoony flavor? Let me know in the comments. And of course, guys, as always, stay humble and happy Halloween.